There is something deeply unsettling about the way most people spend their lives, and if you have ever sat alone in a quiet moment and wondered whether the path you are walking is truly yours, or whether you have simply inherited someone else's idea of what a life should look like, then what you are about to hear might change the way you see everything. Not in a dramatic, overnight kind of way, but slowly, quietly, the way sunlight changes a room without you ever noticing exactly when the darkness left. Henry David Thoreau wrote Life Without Principle in the mid-1800s, but when you read his words carefully, when you really sit with them, you realize that he was not writing about the 1800s at all. He was writing about now. He was writing about the alarm clock you hit every morning, the job you go to not because it feeds your soul but because it feeds your bills, the conversations you have that leave you feeling emptier than before they started, and the strange, hollow feeling that comes at the end of a busy day when you realize you were busy. Yes, very busy, but you cannot quite say what you were busy with or why any of it mattered. That feeling, that quiet dissatisfaction sitting just beneath the surface of an ordinary life, is exactly what Thoreau spent his life trying to understand. And in this essay, this beautiful, uncomfortable, honest essay, he lays it all out with a clarity that feels almost too sharp. Like someone turned up the brightness on a screen you had grown used to seeing dim. So let us walk through this together, not rushing, not skimming the surface, but going deep, the way Thoreau himself would have wanted, taking our time with the ideas, letting them breathe, letting them land. Thoreau begins with something that seems simple but is actually one of the most radical things a person can say in a world built on productivity and profit. He says that he wants to give an account of himself to the world in some way or another, not career achievements, not financial milestones, not titles or credentials, but himself, the actual texture of his inner life. And he is immediately troubled by the fact that this seems to be the one thing the world has no interest in. The world wants to know what you do. It wants to know your output, your function, your value in the marketplace. It has very little patience for who you actually are beneath all of that. He talks about how he once tried to earn money by lecturing, by standing up in front of an audience and sharing what he genuinely thought and felt about life and nature and the human condition, and how he quickly discovered that audiences did not really want that. They wanted something entertaining, something flattering, something that confirmed what they already believed. The moment he said something that challenged them, something that made them genuinely uncomfortable, they pulled back. They preferred a lecture about the merits of farming over a lecture about the spiritual poverty of a life spent chasing money, and Thoreau found this fascinating and sad in equal measure. There is a man, a real man, not one from Thoreau's time but one from ours, who worked 40 years at a company he never loved. He got up at 6 every morning, drove the same route, sat in the same chair, attended the same meetings, and came home every evening with the same tired expression. His children grew up and left. His wife learned to stop asking how his day was because the answer was always the same. And somewhere in his late 50s, sitting alone on a Tuesday evening, he realized he had no idea what he actually enjoyed. Not what he was good at, not what paid well, but what he genuinely, in the privacy of his own heart, found beautiful or meaningful or worth doing. He had been so busy doing what was expected that he had never stopped to ask what was desired. What he desired. And Thoreau would have recognized this man immediately, because this man is not unusual. This man is, in many ways, the norm. Thoreau argues that most people sell themselves far too cheaply. Not in the financial sense, though sometimes in that sense too, but in the deeper sense. They trade their hours, which are irreplaceable, for dollars, which are not. They spend the best parts of their days on work that does not speak to anything essential in them, and then they wonder why they feel vaguely cheated by life, why the weekends never feel quite long enough, why retirement, when it finally comes, feels less like liberation and more like suddenly realizing you have no idea who you are without the job that defined you. He uses the image of a gold rush to make this point, and it is a striking image. During the California gold rush, men abandoned their homes, their families, their ordinary lives, and traveled thousands of miles under brutal conditions chasing the promise of sudden wealth. And Thoreau looks at this and does not see ambition or courage. He sees desperation dressed up as opportunity. He sees men who have been so thoroughly convinced that money is the point of life that they will sacrifice everything, including their actual lives, in pursuit of it. And the tragedy, he says, is not just that many of them failed. The tragedy is that even those who succeeded, who came back with their pockets full of gold, often came back with nothing else. No wisdom, no inner richness, no deeper understanding of what it means to be alive. Just gold. Just the thing that was supposed to make everything else possible but somehow never quite did. Now, it would be easy to hear this and think, well, this is all very nice philosophy, but I have rent to pay. And Thoreau is not unaware of this. He is not naive about the material necessities of life. He lived them. He spent time at Walden Pond specifically to understand what a human being actually needs versus what society tells a human being to want. And what he found was that the actual needs are far fewer and far simpler than we have been taught to believe. What we actually need to survive, to eat, to have shelter, to stay warm, requires far less labor than most of us give. The surplus of our labor, the hours beyond what genuine necessity demands, those hours, Thoreau says, belong to us, and most of us give them away without even noticing. He talks about the quality of work, which is something that gets lost in most conversations about productivity. Not just whether work is being done, but whether the person doing it is genuinely present in it, whether there is any love in it, whether the hands moving through the task are connected to a heart that cares about the outcome. He draws a distinction between work that comes from the inside, from genuine interest and passion, and work that is purely transactional, done only because it pays. And he is unsparing in his assessment. Work done purely for money is not really work in any meaningful sense. It is a form of selling yourself, not your labor. Yourself. And here is where Thoreau gets genuinely uncomfortable to read, because he does not let you rationalize your way out of it. He does not say, well, if you have to do work you do not love, make sure to have hobbies. He does not offer the modern compromise of work-life balance as a solution. He says, more or less, that a life spent primarily on work you do not believe in is a life that is being wasted, and no amount of vacation or weekend hiking or evening television changes the fundamental mathematics of that. But he is not cruel about it. This is important. Thoreau is not standing on a mountain looking down at ordinary people with contempt. He is standing beside them, troubled by the same forces that trouble them, asking the same questions they probably ask themselves in their most honest moments. He writes with the urgency of someone who has genuinely thought about these things and is alarmed by what he has found, not smug about it. There is a difference, and you can feel it in the prose. He turns then to the question of what we pay attention to, and this section of the essay feels almost eerie in how contemporary it sounds. He talks about how people are ravenous for news, for the latest developments, for information about things happening far away that have no real bearing on their actual lives. He watches his neighbors rush to the post office to collect the latest newspapers, poring over them with an intensity they never bring to the natural world just outside their windows, and he finds this deeply strange. Not because news is unimportant, but because the ratio is wrong. People spend far more time consuming information about the world than they spend actually experiencing it. They know everything that is happening in distant places, and almost nothing about the field behind their house, the sound the wind makes through particular trees in October, the way light hits water at 5 in the afternoon. There is a woman, and this is a true kind of story, the kind that happens in 1,000 variations every day, who scrolled through her phone for 2 hours one evening reading about problems she could not solve in places she had never been and would likely never go, and then went to bed feeling anxious and exhausted and somehow guilty, as though the weight of the whole world's suffering had settled on her personally. And in those 2 hours, there had been a sunset happening outside her window, a genuinely spectacular one, pink and gold and lasting only minutes, that she missed entirely. Thoreau would not have been surprised. He would have been sad but not surprised. He is not anti-information. He is not saying that staying informed is bad. He is saying something more precise than that. He is saying that most of what passes for news, most of what we consume so urgently and anxiously, is gossip on a large scale. It is the drama of strangers told to us in a way that makes us feel informed without actually making us wiser. And he asks, very quietly but very pointedly, what it would mean to instead spend those hours in genuine observation, in genuine thought, in genuine conversation with another person, or with the landscape, or with the deep, patient, inarticulate things inside yourself that only come forward when the noise stops. He talks about the slavery of his time, and he talks about it with a fury that surprises you if you have come to think of Thoreau as just a gentle naturalist sitting by a pond. He is not gentle about slavery. He is horrified by it, not just as an institution but as a symptom of something deeply wrong with the values of his society. A society that measures human beings by their economic productivity, that sees people as instruments, that reduces the richness of a human life to its market value, is a society that has already made peace with slavery in its soul, even before it enacts it in law. And he sees this clearly, and says it plainly, and it is bracing. He extends this argument outward, and this is where it gets really interesting. He says that any work done purely out of financial compulsion, any labor that you would stop immediately if the money stopped, has something of slavery in its structure. Not the same thing, not the historical horror and brutality, but something in the same family. The idea that a human being's time and energy belong, first and fundamentally, to someone else's bottom line rather than to their own flourishing, that is a form of unfreedom, and Thoreau refuses to pretend otherwise. Now, around this point in your listening, you might be wondering whether Thoreau has any practical answers, whether this is all beautiful critique with nothing to replace what he is criticizing. And this is a fair question. Thoreau is more diagnostician than prescriptionist. He is better at identifying the illness than prescribing the cure. But there are things, if you listen carefully, that he gestures toward. He talks about simplicity, but not simplicity as an aesthetic, not the kind of simplicity you see in expensive minimalist home decor magazines. Real simplicity. The kind that comes from genuinely reducing your needs, not because deprivation is noble, but because freedom is valuable, and the fewer things you need to survive, the fewer things can hold you hostage. Every want you eliminate is a chain you did not have to wear. He talks about attention, the practice of actually being where you are, of seeing what is in front of you, of hearing what is around you, of letting experience be rich instead of thin. And this is not meditation advice, though it overlaps with it. It is more fundamental than that. It is the argument that a single afternoon spent genuinely present in a forest is worth more, in terms of actual living, than a month of days spent distracted, rushing from one screen to another, never quite landing anywhere. He talks about integrity, and he means something specific by it. He means the alignment between what you believe and how you live, the willingness to arrange your actual daily life according to your actual values, rather than according to what the economy rewards or what your neighbors expect. And he acknowledges that this is hard. He does not pretend it is easy. Living with integrity in a world that is organized around different values is uncomfortable and sometimes lonely and often financially precarious. But he argues, and argues compellingly, that the alternative is worse. The alternative is the kind of success that feels like failure from the inside, the comfortable life that leaves you at 50 or 60 or 70 with a quiet but persistent sense that you missed something essential. Think about what it means, really means, to spend a morning doing something you genuinely love. Not love in the sense that you enjoy it casually, but love in the sense that time disappears when you do it, that you feel more yourself doing it than at almost any other moment, that it connects you to something larger than just your own small concerns. Most people know this feeling. They have had it at some point, in some context, but somewhere along the way they learn to treat it as a luxury rather than a necessity. They learn to do it on weekends, if there is time, after the real work is done. And Thoreau is asking, very gently but very insistently, what if that is the real work? What if that is not the reward for getting through the rest of life but the actual center of it? He turns to nature, as he always does, as his ultimate reference point. Not nature as pretty scenery, not nature as backdrop to human drama, but nature as a living system of intelligence that operates according to principles completely indifferent to the economies and anxieties of human civilization. A river does not hurry, a mountain does not compete, a tree does not spend its energy worrying about whether it is growing fast enough or producing enough, or whether the tree next to it has better leaves. It simply grows according to its own nature, at its own pace, doing exactly what it is designed to do. And in doing so, it becomes fully, completely, magnificently itself. And Thoreau suggests that this is actually available to human beings too. Not the absence of effort, not the absence of difficulty, but the possibility of living from the inside out, according to your own nature rather than in constant anxious response to external demands. He saw this in his time at Walden Pond. The simplicity of life there was not poverty, it was freedom. The hours he spent watching the pond, thinking, writing, walking, were not wasted hours. They were the most productive hours of his life if you measure productivity by what actually matters, by what he understood, what he created, what he became. There is something to be said about the word economy here, because Thoreau uses it in a very specific and interesting way. When he talks about the economy of his life at Walden, he is not talking about frugality for its own sake. He is talking about the relationship between what you spend, your time, your energy, your attention, your years, and what you get in return. He is asking whether most people are getting a fair return on the investment of their one and only life. And his conclusion, quiet but devastating, is that most are not. That most people are spending too much and receiving too little, not because they are stupid or weak, but because they have been taught to measure the return in the wrong currency. The right currency, in Thoreau's accounting, is not money or status or the admiration of strangers. It is something much harder to quantify and much easier to feel. It is the sense, at the end of a day, that you were genuinely here, that you paid attention, that you thought real thoughts rather than just recycling the thoughts of others, that you felt something true, that you did something that came from the deepest part of you rather than from the nervous, people-pleasing, approval-seeking surface, that you, for at least a few hours, lived according to your own principles rather than someone else's. He writes about what he calls the aim of life, and he is very clear that this aim has nothing to do with accumulation. Not of money, not of property, not of achievements, not even of experiences in the shallow sense that we tend to collect them now, checking them off a list, photographing them, moving on. The aim of life, for Thoreau, is something closer to depth, to understanding, to the gradual, humble, joyful process of becoming more fully conscious, more genuinely awake, more honestly and completely yourself. And this sounds abstract until you connect it to something concrete. Think about a conversation you have had, maybe years ago, maybe recently, where something real was said, where someone told you the truth, or you told someone else the truth, or an idea was turned over between two people until it gleamed, until you both understood something you had not understood before. Those conversations stay with you. They are nourishing in a way that is hard to explain. They are the opposite of the kind of conversation where you talk for 2 hours and afterward cannot remember a single thing of substance that was said. Thoreau valued the first kind of conversation above almost everything. He distrusted the second kind. He thought that a life full of the second kind, busy, social, constantly communicating but never actually connecting, was a very particular kind of loneliness. He is also remarkably honest about money, in a way that does not moralize and does not romanticize poverty. He simply observes that the pursuit of wealth, as a primary life goal, tends to crowd out everything else. Not immediately, not dramatically, but incrementally. It takes 1 hour here and 1 weekend there and one compromise after another, and slowly the things that actually feed your soul get pushed to the margins, and then to the edges, and then off the page entirely. And you do not notice it happening until one day you look up and realize that the life you are living is composed almost entirely of means and has very few ends. Thoreau was fiercely opposed to the idea that a man's worth could be measured by his bank account, and he said so at a time when this was a genuinely radical position. Not just philosophically radical, but socially radical. His neighbors thought he was strange. Some of them thought he was lazy. A man of his intelligence and education, they thought, could surely be doing something more productive than walking around in the woods all day. And Thoreau's response, never said quite this bluntly but always implied, was productive toward what? Toward what end? For what purpose? If the most productive use of your intelligence is to make money, you do not need to buy things you do not want to impress people you do not like. Then perhaps productivity itself needs to be examined. We are now near the 10-minute mark of this journey, and if you are still with us, if these ideas are landing somewhere real in you, then let us keep going, because we are only partway through the territory Thoreau is mapping, and the view gets more interesting the further in you go. He writes about the soul, not in a religious sense necessarily, but in the sense of whatever it is in a human being that is not reducible to function. The part of you that responds to music or a night sky, or an unexpected act of kindness in a way that is completely disproportionate to any practical consideration. The part of you that sometimes, in quiet moments, knows things you cannot prove and feels things you cannot name. Thoreau takes this part seriously enough to organize his life around it. And he finds it alarming that most people treat it as the least important part of themselves, the part you attend to after everything else is done, if there is anything left over. He talks about the way commerce and busyness dull the inner life, not because there is anything wrong with commerce or industry in principle, but because when they become all-consuming, when they leave no room for silence or solitude or genuine reflection, they create a particular kind of spiritual poverty. A person can be very comfortable, very successful by conventional measures, very busy and surrounded by people and full of plans, and be utterly starved of the kind of experience that actually nourishes the soul. And this starvation is insidious because it does not announce itself. It does not feel like suffering in any obvious way. It feels more like a low-grade numbness, a sense that everything is fine but something is missing, and you cannot quite say what. He makes a point that takes a moment to absorb. He says that the cost of a thing is the amount of what he calls life it requires to be exchanged for it. Not the price tag, not the number of hours at work, but the actual portion of your living, your genuine aliveness, that you must trade to obtain it. And when you start measuring things that way, when you look at your possessions not in terms of what they cost in dollars, but in terms of what portion of your actual life they required, things start to look very different. That car, those clothes, that bigger house, when you calculate not the financial cost but the life cost, when you add up how many hours of genuine engagement with the world you traded for them, sometimes the math does not look as good as you thought. A young man, freshly out of university, took a job he did not want because it paid well. Not exceptionally well, but enough to afford the kind of apartment and the kind of lifestyle that felt appropriate to the person he was supposed to be becoming. And for 10 years he worked very hard at this job. He got promotions, he got a bigger apartment, he got a car that was better than his first car. And one Saturday morning, sitting in that bigger apartment, with that better car parked outside, he realized that he had not read a book he actually wanted to read in 2 years. that he had not spent a weekend doing something purely because he loved it in longer than he could remember. That he had friends, yes, but that most of his friendships had become transactional in the way that professional networks become transactional. People you know because they are useful rather than because they are dear. He was not unhappy exactly, but he was hollow in a way that scared him, and he thought about what he had traded, 10 years of Saturdays, 10 years of mornings that could have been spent differently, and he felt for the first time what Thoreau was talking about. The actual cost of a thing. Thoreau insists that there is another way, not a perfect way, not an easy way, but a different way, a way of measuring what matters that starts not from the outside in, not from what the market values and what your neighbors expect, but from the inside out, from what you actually find beautiful and meaningful and worth the one life you have been given to spend. He talks about what he calls the highest use of a man, and his answer is not what you might expect. It is not achievement. It is not even goodness in the moral sense, though goodness matters to him greatly. The highest use of a man, in Thoreau's framework, is to be fully awake, to be genuinely conscious, to move through the world not as a sleepwalker following a prescribed path, but as someone who is actually here, actually noticing, actually thinking, actually feeling, actually living. And he finds that most people do this only occasionally in flashes, when something breaks through the habitual haze, a birth, a death, a piece of music that catches you off guard, a moment in nature so beautiful it stops thought entirely. And then the haze closes back in, and they go back to the routine. What he wanted, what he worked toward in his own life with tremendous deliberateness, was to extend those moments of genuine wakefulness until they were not moments anymore but a state, a baseline condition. To be, as much as humanly possible, present to the extraordinary fact of being alive at all. He does not say this is easy, he does not say it is possible to achieve perfectly. He says it is the direction worth moving in, that the effort toward it, the daily practice of choosing consciousness over habit, depth over distraction, genuine engagement over efficient production, is itself the point. Not a destination you arrive at, but a way of traveling. He talks about the earth beneath his feet with a tenderness that is almost startling. He was genuinely in love with the physical world, with its seasons and textures and sounds and silences, and he believed that this love was not a distraction from real life, but the substance of it. That a person who knew the sounds of different birds, who could read the sky for weather, who had watched enough sunrises to know how they differ from each other, who had spent enough time alone in natural spaces to feel genuinely comfortable in their own company, that person had something that no amount of money or status could buy, and that no economic reversal could take away. There is a richness in attention to the natural world that is completely free and completely inexhaustible. The same forest is different every time you walk through it, different in different seasons, different in different light, different depending on how quiet you manage to be inside yourself. The person who has learned to pay this kind of attention has access to an endless, renewable source of nourishment that costs nothing and belongs to no one and can be revoked by no employer or market crash or change in social fashion. He writes about what we owe each other as members of a society, and his answer is interesting because it is both demanding and liberating. He does not think we owe each other compliance. He does not think we owe each other the performance of happiness or the pretense that things are fine when they are not. He thinks we owe each other honesty, the real kind, not the brutal kind, but the kind that comes from actually having thought about things and being willing to say what you found. He thinks we owe each other the effort of genuine thought, because a society full of people who have stopped thinking for themselves, who have outsourced their opinions to newspapers and politicians and popular sentiment, is a society that has lost something essential about what makes human community valuable. He is deeply skeptical of conformity, not because being different is inherently virtuous, but because conformity, when it is not chosen but simply defaulted to, represents a kind of abdication. A giving up of the most interesting thing about being human, which is the capacity to see for yourself, to think for yourself, to arrive at your own understanding of what is true and good and worth doing. And a society where this capacity is exercised vigorously, where people are genuinely thinking rather than just going along, even if it is noisier and more contentious, is a healthier and more alive society than one where everyone quietly agrees to agree. He makes a provocative observation about politics, which lands differently depending on when you are reading it, but always lands hard. He says that political reform, important as it is, addresses symptoms rather than causes. You can change the laws, you can change the government, you can rearrange the structures of power, and if the underlying values of the people remain unchanged, if they still measure worth in money and status and consumption, if they still trade their inner lives for external rewards, the new system will eventually look a great deal like the old one. Real change, for Thoreau, is always inward first. Not instead of outward change, but before it. A person who has genuinely changed the way they live, who has reduced their needs, who has stopped participating in systems they find morally wrong, who has organized their days around what they actually believe, that person is a more powerful agent of change than 100 people who vote for the right candidate and then go back to the same old life. This is not political quietism. Thoreau himself was arrested for refusing to pay a tax that supported slavery. He wrote Civil Disobedience, one of the most influential political essays in history. He believed deeply in the obligation to resist injustice, but he believed the resistance had to be genuine, rooted in genuine values, and that genuine values had to be lived, not just stated. You cannot argue for simplicity from a position of excess. You cannot argue for freedom from a position of voluntary servitude to the marketplace. The argument has to be embodied, has to be visible in the texture of your actual daily life, or it is just words. He talks about leisure, but not in the modern sense of leisure as consumption, as entertainment, as the reward for productive labor. He means something older and more serious. He means the kind of leisure that is genuinely free, where you are doing what you are doing for no reason other than that it is interesting or beautiful or worth doing. Time that belongs entirely to you, that produces nothing marketable, that cannot be optimized or monetized, that is valuable purely because it is alive with genuine human experience. And he argues that this kind of leisure is not a luxury. It is not something to be rationed out to people who have earned it through sufficient productivity. It is a fundamental human need, as real as food and shelter, and a society that does not provide it to its members, that keeps people so busy surviving that they have no time to actually live, that society is failing its people in a deep and serious way. He talks about reading, about real reading, the kind that changes you, not the kind you do to stay informed or to get ahead professionally, though those have their place, but the kind where you encounter an idea that reorganizes something inside you, where you close the book different from how you opened it. He laments that most of his contemporaries never read this way, that they read the newspaper and light novels and self-help manuals but never really grapple with the great works of thought that the human tradition has produced. And he thinks this is a tragedy, not just for individuals but for society, because a people who do not read deeply do not think deeply, and a people who do not think deeply are easily led. He is not an elitist about this. He is not saying that only the educated or the privileged have access to deep thought. He is saying almost the opposite, that deep thought is available to anyone willing to be alone with it, that a farm laborer who spends his evenings reading Homer is more genuinely educated than a university graduate who has learned how to perform education without ever really encountering it. The question is not what credentials you have, but what you have actually absorbed, what has gotten inside you and changed the way you see. He writes about friendship with a care that surprises readers who know him mainly as a solitary figure. He was not antisocial. He valued friendship enormously, but he valued a specific kind of friendship, the kind where two people are genuinely interested in each other's inner lives, where conversation goes somewhere real, where there is enough trust to say the true thing rather than the comfortable thing. He found most social interaction exhausting because it was so relentlessly superficial, so concerned with pleasantries and social positioning and the careful performance of acceptable opinions. What he wanted from another person was their actual self, their actual thoughts, the thing behind the polished surface, and he was willing to offer the same in return. He reflects on what it means to be alive at a particular moment in history and to be genuinely aware of it, not just absorbing the events but thinking about their meaning, asking what they reveal about human nature and human possibility. He lived through enormous changes, the industrialization of America, the expansion westward, the crisis of slavery, and he watched his neighbors absorb these changes without really examining them, going along with the current because it was easier than swimming against it. And he chose to swim against it, not always successfully, not without cost, but consistently, because he had decided that consciousness was more important than comfort. There is a moment near the end of the essay where Thoreau says something that has stayed with readers for over a century and a half. He says that it is not worthwhile to go around the world to count the cats in Zanzibar. It is a strange, funny, arresting image. What he means is that travel, exploration, the accumulation of experience for its own sake is worth nothing if you are not bringing genuine attention and genuine thought to what you encounter. You can circle the globe and come home no wiser. You can stay in one room and understand everything. The geography matters less than the quality of attention you bring to it. And this is, in some ways, the whole argument of the essay distilled into a single image. Life without principle is life lived on the surface. Life spent chasing the next thing, the next experience, the next achievement, the next distraction, without ever stopping to ask what it all means or whether it is adding up to anything worth having. Life with principle, life as Thoreau wants us to live it, is something quieter and more demanding and ultimately far richer. It is life where you stop and notice. where you think before you act, where you ask regularly and seriously what you actually value, and then arrange your days accordingly. He is not naive enough to think this is always possible or that it requires no compromise. He knows that people have obligations, that families need to be fed and rent needs to be paid, and children need to grow up in some degree of stability. He is not asking anyone to abandon their responsibilities. He is asking something more subtle and more personal. He is asking whether, within whatever constraints you genuinely have, you are making the most of the freedom you actually do possess. Because most people, he suspects, have more freedom than they use. They are more trapped by habit and fear and other people's expectations than by actual necessity. And recognizing that, sitting with that uncomfortable possibility, is the beginning of something. The beginning of what? Of a life that is actually yours. Of days that feel, at their end, like they were worth living. Of a relationship with your own existence that is characterized by genuine engagement rather than performed contentment. Of the deep, quiet, durable satisfaction that comes not from having done everything right or accumulated everything valuable, but from having been, as often as possible, genuinely present. Genuinely here. Thoreau ended his life young at 44 of tuberculosis. He had not achieved conventional success. He had not accumulated wealth or fame or the kind of recognition that his contemporaries gave to politicians and industrialists. He had one book that sold almost no copies in his lifetime and a reputation as an eccentric. What he had, and what he left behind, was a body of thought so clear and so honest and so deeply rooted in genuine experience that it has outlasted almost everything his successful contemporaries built. Because he was writing about things that do not go out of date, about the relationship between a person and their own life, between consciousness and time, between what we spend ourselves on and what we get in return. These are not 19th century questions. They are every century's questions. They are your questions right now in whatever situation you are in, with whatever choices you are facing. And if you take one thing from this summary, let it be this. You do not have to build a cabin by a pond. You do not have to quit your job or abandon your ambitions or move to the woods. What Thoreau is asking of you is much simpler and much harder than that. He is asking you to be awake, to be genuinely, honestly, courageously awake to your own life. To ask, regularly and seriously, whether the way you are spending your days reflects what you actually believe and value and love. To give your attention, your real attention, not the distracted half-presence that passes for attention most of the time, but the full, warm, curious, patient, genuine thing to the life you are actually living. Because this is the life. Not the one coming later, after the promotion, after the mortgage is paid off, after the kids leave home, after you retire, after you finally have time. This one, the one happening right now, while you are listening to this, while the day moves around you and the world goes on and the hours continue their irreversible passage from future to past. This is the one you have. And Thoreau, with all his gentle ferocity, all his uncomfortable honesty, all his love for the actual texture of living things, is simply asking you not to waste it. He believed that every person contains more than they know, more wisdom, more capacity for beauty, more ability to think clearly and feel deeply and act from their truest values than the ordinary machinery of social life tends to allow. He believed that the world would be genuinely better, not in some vague metaphorical sense, but in concrete, practical human terms, if more people had the courage to live from that deeper place. To ask not what is expected of them, but what is true for them. To build their lives not on the shifting sand of other people's approval, but on the bedrock of their own considered, honest, carefully examined values. Life without principle, he says, is a kind of sleepwalking. It is moving through your days on autopilot, doing what is expected, consuming what is available, chasing what the culture tells you to want, without ever stopping to ask whether any of it is actually you. Life with principle is waking up, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, persistently, daily, the way light comes into a room in the morning, slowly at first and then all at once filling every corner. He wrote this essay not as a sermon and not as a self-help manual, but as a personal testimony. This is what I have found, he is saying. This is what I have learned from paying attention. This is what it looks like to take your own life seriously, to treat your days as genuinely precious rather than as material to be processed and gotten through. Take it or leave it, but know that he meant every word, and that he lived by it as fully as any human being can live by a principle, which is imperfectly but genuinely, with his whole difficult, particular, irreplaceable self. And that, when you think about it, is all any of us can do. Take what we have been given, the intelligence, the attention, the years, the capacity for wonder and thought and love, and use it as honestly and as fully as we can. Not perfectly, not without failure or doubt or the occasional surrender to comfort, but genuinely, with real intention, with the willingness to stop every now and then and ask the question that Thoreau never stopped asking, and that we would do well never to stop asking either. Is this the life I mean to be living? If yes, go on with joy. If no, then perhaps today, in whatever small or large way is available to you, is the day to begin. If this summary spoke to something in you, if any of these ideas landed somewhere real, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Audiobook Library. It genuinely helps this channel grow, helps more people find these ideas, and makes it possible to keep putting this kind of content out into the world. Every like, every subscription, every share matters more than you might think, and it is the most direct way to say that this kind of thing is worth continuing. And please, take some time to explore the rest of the videos on this channel. There are summaries, readings, and reflections on some of the most important and beautiful books ever written. Books that have the power to change not just how you think, but how you live. Browse through what is here, find what calls to you, and let great ideas be the company you keep. Because if Thoreau taught us anything, it is that the ideas you let in, the thoughts you spend time with, the voices you listen to in your quiet moments, these shape you, more than you might imagine, in the direction either of sleep or of waking. Choose waking. Come back whenever you need to be reminded why.